the Republican Party in North Carolina needs to take a long look in the mirror, because while the rest of the country is celebrating a red wave, we lost the supermajority in the House, we lost the governor's seat, we lost the lieutenant governor's seat, we lost the attorney general, and we lost education.
So tell me, Catherine, about your journey to becoming state superintendent. Tell me about your childhood and your career.
Well, I am the daughter and granddaughter of teachers. My father was and still is a music teacher at age 80. My mother's parents were both teachers, and my grandfather actually went on to become the superintendent of the small rural northern Ohio county where my mother grew up. I was that kid who always wanted to be a teacher, and I used to play dolls. I took my dolls to play school with, and my father, who was a high school band director when I was little, every year at the end of the year when summer band would start, my sister and I would go into the school dumpster and dig around for all of the unused supplies that the teachers were throwing out, like grade books and things like that we could play school with. So I had a whole grade book that I would fill with pretend names, and I would give these pretend kids grades, and I just never wanted to be anything other than a teacher. And then I did become a teacher. I taught high school English for about 10 years. In various places, including overseas in the UK, where I was stationed with my husband and children. And I moved to North Carolina when he left the Navy, and taught in rural North Carolina for 3 more years, and then had an opportunity to stay in education but really get outside of the classroom. And that's when I became a consultant or a turnaround coach in low-performing schools. So I would travel to various places in the United States and work in schools that were wanting to become better through mostly teacher coaching. And it was during that time that I was approached by then Governor Pat McCrory's administration to talk about possibly becoming his senior education advisor. And I did end up taking that role, and that was my entrance into policy. And then after that, I worked in the UNC system office, where I worked on a portfolio of legislation that involved teacher recruitment, supporting beginning teachers, principals, and other types of support functions that the university played, that the system office played in K12 education. And then I had the opportunity to kind of transition into higher education when I became the chancellor of a nonprofit online university with a online campus in North Carolina, Western Governors University, North Carolina. And that was a very unique experience, because you're serving adults who were largely not successful in higher education the first time around, who are working and now are looking to come back to higher education to finish a degree that they started. And so in that situation, you're seeing every day what happens when people are either not able to pursue higher education when they finish high school right away, or do pursue higher education but are unsuccessful for whatever reason. And that had a big influence on my work here at the department and some of the things that I've prioritized. But I was in that role for 3 years when I decided to run for State Superintendent of North Carolina. We are one of 8 states with partisan elections for the role of state chief. And I was successful that first time.
When you were turning around schools, did you have a plan that you would follow going into each one? Like, what were you looking for, and what were some of the changes that you saw like make the biggest impact?
So a lot of times I was part of an organization that has some specific ways that we believe are the best ways to go about school turnaround work. But really, you're starting with culture, because culture trumps strategy every time. So school culture is incredibly important when you're talking about needing to turn things around for students, because what any educator worth their salt will tell you is that the kids are not the problem, it's the adults. So all kids have the ability to learn and grow and thrive, and the adults have to be the ones to figure out how to make that happen. And that starts with the school principal. And so we were working both with, I would be part of a team that was working with the principal and with the teachers and the guidance counselors to, in essence, fix school culture, so that you could then start to work on teachers' pedagogy and how they were actually delivering instruction. How are they communicating with children? How are they going about the daily activities of planning lessons for students, delivering that material, and then assessing that material. So that's sort of the magic combination of how you start to turn around a school. Of course, you can only go so far when the delivery methods are flawed. And this is something that we've seen, for example, with the science of reading, where the educators in this country have finally figured out that the way that we've been teaching kids to read since the 90s, the move away from a phonics-based approach to early literacy instruction to what's called whole language, is not grounded in research and data. And consequently, we're seeing a generation of children who are graduating from high school not reading on grade level or not reading proficiently. And then this impacts their ability to be successful after high school. So I would say that, all of these experiences have absolutely played a role in the work that's been going on the last 4 years.
Was that shift away from phonics and then back to it something that you saw when you were in schools as a teacher?
Well, as a high school teacher, I was teaching students who were not reading on grade level, and I never understood why that was. Not having been through an elementary education program, I went through a secondary education preparation program. But it wasn't until actually 2017, when I was in the UNC system office, that I really started to understand what had been happening since the 1990s with our move away from a phonics-based approach to early literacy instruction.
So you're also a cancer survivor?
I am.
Tell me about that.
So when I was at Western Governors University, I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer with a grade 3 tumor type, which is a very aggressive tumor type. I found the lump myself. I was not overdue or negligent in my yearly mammograms. I was 44 years old when I was diagnosed and had no history of breast cancer in my family. And so I was very surprised to get the diagnosis. And but I was very fortunate that I found it as early as I did. Had I waited or not done the exam myself, it could have very easily been a stage 2 or 3 by the time it was found. So I was treated with chemotherapy and radiation after a lumpectomy, and I got my diagnosis in October. Was finished with radiation and chemo by March, and went back to work that month in the UNC system office. And so I'm sorry, I said earlier that I got diagnosed when I was at Western Governors. That's not what happened at all. I got diagnosed when I was in the governor's office, and then and proceeded from there. I had another health scare when I was at Western Governors University that was related to my cancer diagnosis, but that actually ended up meaning that I officially declared my candidacy for this role from the hospital. But all is fine now, and I am perfectly healthy, and I have been cancer-free for 8 years now.
Congrats.
Thank you.
What do you think was the hardest thing about that whole experience for you?
Well, the hardest part was having to tell my children. So my children were in second grade, fifth grade, and middle school when my diagnosis came. And I think trying to explain something like this to your children is very hard. The second hardest part is that when your hair starts falling out, you have to decide, are you going to let it continue to fall out, or are you just going to go get it shaved off? And I went and got it shaved off, and I, came in the door and took off my hat and showed my children, and they said, "Mom, you look like Halsey." And I said, "Oh, thank you so much. That's such a great compliment." But that was short-lived because all of your hair falls out. So, and that's how you know it's working. So you just tell yourself this is a good thing, and then you just move on.
So being state superintendent was your first elected position, first time serving as an elected official. What were your expectations going into that? And did they align with the reality, or were they the same or different in any way?
So I tried not to have a lot of expectations. I mean, I had worked in state government and in the policy space long enough to know what the role entailed. But I don't know that you can ever be fully prepared for a role like this. I will say that when I declared my candidacy, there was no pandemic. So that certainly changed the calculus. When I got elected and began in January of 2021, schools were still closed. So that was a very unique time. My first goal was to get schools open, and that was difficult. I think if I were to pinpoint one thing that I was not expecting was the trying to triangulate the relationship with the State Board of Education, who are almost all Democrats, with the legislature, who our legislature is controlled by Republicans. And so trying to keep politics out of education, which is what I had promised on the campaign trail, was difficult. And I would say that it was actually the state board that made that much more difficult for me than it was the legislature, which was certainly not something that I expected. But I think at the end of the day, anyone who's in this role has to believe that those who are making policy, influencing policy, carrying out policy are all doing what they think is best. But there's never going to be agreement on what is best and how we should do what's best. And I didn't realize the level of disagreement that there would be coming into the role.
Were there any Republicans who wanted to keep schools closed or Democrats who wanted them open? Did anybody surprise you as far as that partisan split goes?
Well, at that time, I really didn't know as many legislators then as I do now. I mean, there were a few legislators that I had worked with before. But no, when you look not just at legislatures, but when you look at local boards of education across the country, they were largely Democrats in places where local boards are elected, like in North Carolina. It was schools that remained closed were run by Democrat-elected, predominantly Democrats who had been elected to local boards of education who kept schools closed. It was very partisan.
And can you just tell me more about your perspective at that time? Like, what was driving your perspective as far as we really should be in person?
Yeah, so first of all, I think what was driving my perspective was that it wasn't necessarily whether schools should be closed or open at any given time. It was more, this district's data doesn't look the same as this district's data in terms of diagnoses of positive tests for COVID. And so in my mind, it should have been a local decision that, a local superintendent, the local health department, and the local Board of Education should have been the ones to decide whether or not a school was going to be open or closed based on their health data. And that was not happening. We saw blanket school closures across the whole state. So that formed a lot of my perspective. But then I think we started to get wind of what it was like for kids to be home and not at school, and how the fact that there were children not eating because school was not open. There were children not who were isolated at home because parents still had to go to work. And it just got to a point where the cure was worse than the disease, and schools needed to reopen.
Tell me about something that might surprise the average person about being the state superintendent, like something you do on a day-to-day basis. And honestly, I think most people probably don't even know what your roles and tasks are day-to-day. So.
Yeah, they don't. I think, well, I can tell you what most people don't know is that local superintendents do not report to the state superintendent of public instruction. So I have no regulatory authority over any single person in a school or school district. So I am not able to reprimand or dismiss principals, teachers, superintendents. I am only responsible for the 1,300 people in this agency. I also don't have a vote as per our state constitution. I do not have a vote on the State Board of Education, which is something that most people are shocked to hear. But our Constitution was set up in a way that is very unique compared to other states. In fact, our form of K12 governance is the only one of its kind in the whole country, in that we have a Department of Public Instruction with an elected chief that is the administrative agency of the State Board of Education, which derives its power from the Constitution, whose members are appointed by the governor only for 8-year terms. That is a very unique structure that has led to lawsuits, 2 lawsuits in the last 20 years on both sides of the aisle.
And tell me, what are some of the things you're most proud of during your tenure that you accomplished?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is our work around the science of reading. So I mentioned earlier that in the 90s, this country, starting with California, largely moved away from teaching kids to read through phonics. And by phonics, what we mean is the way a letter on the page matches a sound. So if you see the letter B, you know that the sound it makes is B, 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 and so on and so forth. The way that the dominant form of early literacy instruction since the late 90s, thanks to a program developed by a single woman out of Columbia University Teachers College, is known as whole language. And that is the idea that we use visual cues to teach students to read. So I might hold up a picture, and if you can see this right here, I might point to this and ask you, okay, what do you think this word is right here, given this picture? And you might say sun, because you see a picture of a sun, but that's not what that word is. That word is schools. And even if there had been a picture of a school here, and you thought, okay, that's the word school, the brain does not learn to read by matching words with pictures. But that is what whole language is. It's an approach to teaching kids to read that requires them to use context clues on the page, including pictures, to memorize how words look. And so the process of learning to sound out words or decode is not necessarily a part of the whole language approach to teaching kids to read. Humans are hardwired to learn to speak. We are not hardwired to learn to read. The alphabet is a relatively recent intervention, all things considered. And so reading is a hearing activity, not a visual activity. And so children learn to read by learning the letter sounds and then the blends that the letters make, like SH makes sh. And you have to teach students how to put those letters together to make sounds before you can start working on comprehension, fluency, and vocabulary with them. And so I took office in January of 2021. In April of 21, we passed the Excellent Public Schools Act with bipartisan support. It's a very well-funded piece of legislation and very comprehensive that defines what high-quality reading instruction looks like in terms of the science of reading. It requires that all pre-K through fifth grade teachers participate in a professional development called LETTERS, which is a training that teaches teachers how to teach kids to read using a phonics-based approach to early literacy instruction. And it also requires that districts adopt literacy curriculum that is aligned to the science of reading. And since we have begun enacting that legislation and watched our teachers, 44,000 educators across North Carolina have participated in this 180-hour professional development, we have seen our data for K-3 foundational literacy skills outpace the rest of the nation. Our students are doing better on the same test that's given in all 50 states than the rest of the nation. And it's not just students in the aggregate, it's also all of our student groups. Our Hispanic, our Native American, and our African American students are all outperforming their peer groups in the rest of the country. And we're so proud of that. It's a lot of hard work by everyone in education.
Was there anything you really wanted to do going into this that you were unable to for one reason or another?
Yeah, one of the things that I really wanted to do that there's just such large bipartisan support for is changing the accountability model. So right now, every school in North Carolina gets a letter grade every year, like an A through F, that is supposed to be indicative of the quality of that school. But that grade is only based on the end of grade testing that a school participates in. So there is a formula where you take 80% of the level of achievement that students attained on math and reading and science tests, and then you factor in 20% of how much they grew, how much the teacher grew students in that school from beginning of year to the end of the year. And that spits out a number that corresponds to a letter grade. So it's a weighted formula of 80% achievement, 20% growth, and then that tells the school, okay, you're a C or you're a D. The problem with this is that there are a lot of things that schools do or should be doing that factor into what school quality looks like. For example, chronic absenteeism. I think we should be holding schools accountable for the percentage of kids who are chronically absent. Not absent a couple times a year. You can't control for that. But you can control when, right now, we've got about 30% of kids in North Carolina are chronically absent, which means they're missing more than 18 days of school per year. There are things that schools can do to mitigate that. And I think that we should be holding them accountable in that letter grade for doing that. The other issue there is that in a high school, only about 10% of faculty teach a tested subject that is contributing to that assigned letter grade. So what about the other 90% of teachers? What are they doing to contribute to student success and school quality? So we need a revised accountability model that reflects all of the things that schools do or should be doing to ensure that all students are successful.
What are some of those strategies that can help with chronic absenteeism?
Well, for one thing, it has to do with how you communicate with parents. I think that a large problem with chronic absenteeism, because it's not just high school students, it's younger students as well, is that if parents don't see the value in making sure their students are at school or their children are at school, then their children won't be at school. So I think parent communication is a big one. But with high schools too, it's like so many high school kids do not see the relevance of going to school. And I think that we need to rethink what high school looks like, that it needs to be less about checking boxes and more about preparing kids to be employed, enlisted, or enrolled when they graduate from high school.
So tell me about the primary this year. It was a upset. Just start that story from the very beginning, if you don't mind. When was the first time you heard about Michelle Morrow?
Well, I did not hear about her until, I don't know, probably a couple of months before the primary. I didn't know who she was, even though she had run for a county school board seat in the district where I have a child who attends public schools. But I had been attacked by a group of people who say that they represent the base of the Republican Party in North Carolina, starting my second month in office. Someone who was hired to systematically remove me from office under the accusation that I was not conservative enough. And so consequently, there were some, what I would say for sure were untruths spread about the work that I was doing. Things that were, sometimes outright lies about what was happening at the Department of Public Instruction. Misinformation spread that had to do with decisions that the board made that I didn't have any say in making. And I think at the end of the day, my campaign team and I really thought that because we had so many things to lift up and champion, accomplishments like getting schools open, like I got legislation passed that would strengthen the penalty for sex offenders in schools, which is something that a lot of parents were concerned about. We got the return to phonics. We got career and technical education legislation passed that a lot of folks in the Republican Party felt very strongly about. There were a lot of things that we did that were right, and we had data to show for it. And I think that, we were, while I would not say that my campaign team was complacent, we just thought that someone who had never worked in a public school, had never worked as a teacher in a public school, had not entrusted her own children to the public schools, was not a serious contender for this role. But primaries being what they are, voter turnout was very low and different demographically this time. I lost my primary. And, I knew that there was very little chance, and even said so publicly, that she would win a general election, and she did not. But I think that, someone who, was all over YouTube saying that Satan was in our schools and that schools were indoctrination centers and teachers were bad people and, espousing crazy things like the adrenochrome theory and it's very difficult to take someone seriously like that. But we are not a purple state. A lot of people say that we are, but we are not. We are a red state that tends to elect Democrat governors. But I think that the Republican Party in North Carolina needs to take a long look in the mirror because while the rest of the country is celebrating a red wave, we lost the supermajority in the House. We lost the governor's seat. We lost the lieutenant governor's seat. We lost the attorney general, and we lost education. And that should be a big wake-up call to the base of the Republican Party in North Carolina.
As somebody who's been in schools to film teachers very often, many different schools, I've never seen this, what people perceive happening, which I think is that teachers are like brainwashing the kids to be gay or trans or something. Mm-hmm. Where do you think that sentiment is actually coming from? And like, do you think there's any grain of truth to that, or is it just stuff people are saying?
So I wouldn't say that, I've never had someone say to me, did you know that teachers are brainwashing kids into becoming gay? What I have witnessed personally is that there are teachers who, in high school, who do feel that their job is to be there for their students who are gay or identifying as a gender other than that which is on their birth certificate. I think that the issue with that kind of support that I think is well-intentioned, when that becomes a problem is when the parent is left out of the equation. When the parent is not informed about what's happening at school, and students are keeping things from their parents, and teachers are keeping things from parents, that is problematic. And I think that's what the Parents' Bill of Rights does address. I think that there is a lot of activism on both the base on the left and the base on the right that relies on extrapolating things, taking things out of context, blowing them up out of proportion in a hyperbolic way in order to get people riled up and increase their membership, maybe even. But I do think there's some truth in the beliefs of both sides. I mean, I think there's a kernel of truth in the fact that there are people who work in education who absolutely consider themselves activists and want to espouse their point of view to their students. We see that in universities all the time. I don't know that it bothers us as much at the university level because kids should be thinking for themselves, although I don't know that that's entirely true either. But I think that it is certainly not the norm for that to be in our high school classrooms, but it does happen. And if you are a parent or a grandparent who has had this happen within your own family, where you feel like the political views of your child's teacher are infringing upon your own views, then there are lots of things that a parent can do in order to combat this. They can, first of all, talk to the teacher and let them know that their views are not the views of the student and the family. They can request an alternative assignment so that if the assignment is something that a parent doesn't think is appropriate, the teacher has to give an alternate assignment. If these issues are still not addressed by the teacher, then the parent can go to the principal. Now, I do think that, as I said, there are teachers who believe that their purpose is to inculcate or maybe even indoctrinate, although I don't know that they see what they're doing as indoctrination. But there are certainly, I don't think that what's happening on college campuses is as rampant and widespread in high school classrooms. There is no cat litter in classrooms in our public schools. That is
yeah.
a myth.
That was one of the more interesting
Yes.
stories that went around for
Yes.
sure. Tell me more about just that initial moment when you found out about the primary. I mean, did you talk to Michelle Morrow, or did you guys, what was that like for you?
Michelle Morrow and her team had been spreading a lie saying that I was allowing registered sex offenders to keep their teaching licenses. So no, I did not speak with her. And I still have not speak with her, and I will not speak with her. I had the support of the General Assembly, of Republicans in the General Assembly, and I had the support of a lot of independents and Democrats. So I am not going to lie, I was very surprised that I lost my primary. It was a very difficult pill to swallow, but there was nothing that I would have done differently. I mean, I have been running an agency with 1,300 people, a $13 billion budget, with the greatest academic loss of a generation, and doing a really good job. And if I didn't have enough time to give to running a campaign against somebody who had never even participated in the public school system in North Carolina, then so be it. I have absolutely no regrets about the way that my campaign was run, or about the endorsements that I took or did not take. And I was committed to keeping students at the center of everything that we did at the department. And the support that we gave to our districts through data and personnel was support that they'd never received before out of this agency. So I and my team are leaving this agency with our heads held high. I could not be more proud of the people that I assembled to create the senior leadership team at the Department of Public Instruction.
Do you have any concerns about the just general culture, the fact that the majority of the Republican voters nominated her? What does that say to you? Does it say anything to you about how you view the Republican Party or their future in politics?
Yeah, I think that the concern is the primary system, because voter turnout is so low in primaries, and the people who turn out for primaries are not. It's such a small percentage compared to those who vote in the general. And so I think you can absolutely explain my loss in that way. So yeah, I think my concern is that when the base of the party is so centered on finding candidates that align with their own views to a T, rather than thinking about who could actually win a general election, that's concerning. And that's why we lost all of those seats. Because the base of the party elected people, thanks to the state GOP leadership, who could not win in a general election in this state.
Do you think that you would have beaten Mo Green had you been the
100%. Yep.
What do you see as your biggest differences with his ideology?
I don't really know what Mo's ideology is, to be honest. I think, like me, he believes that all students should have an excellent public education, and that there are great things about our system and things that need improving. And I have no doubt that he is a person of integrity. But I think that he was compelled to run for this role, and rather than inspired to run for this role. And I think that that I have yet to see a true vision from him about what he wants to do, what he thinks we need to be doing better, what the support from the agency will look like. But I wish him nothing but the best.
Are you willing to say any more about the compelled aspect versus sort of choosing to do so?
Well, I mean, Mr. Green said himself at the Public School Forum Eggs and Issues breakfast that he was asked by the governor to run.
What else do I need to ask you about to just fully understand what you've been up to the past 4 years and what's important to you?
Well, I think one of the, aside from literacy, the other big shift that we tried to make in public education is helping parents and local superintendents and principals and teachers and the legislature understand that the purpose of K12 education is not to prepare kids for end of grade testing. And it's really not to prepare them for graduation either. The purpose of K12 education is to prepare students for life and success and work after high school. And we have too many kids who are crossing the graduation stage with no plan for after high school. Only about a third of kids get any kind of post-secondary education and training by the time they're 24 years old after high school. And only about 23% of kids in North Carolina graduate from high school every year and get a 4-year degree by the time they're 24 years old. So that says to me that the system is serving well about a third of kids. And so we need to reorient public education towards the goal of preparing kids for life after high school. And that's what we did with the Portrait of a Graduate, which says that our schools need to be teaching durable skills like personal responsibility, adaptability, empathy, critical thinking, things like that, alongside the academic pieces that kids absolutely must have from school. But academics are not enough. And we have a system of education that really has not changed very much in the last 120 years. Whereas we've seen incredible changes in the way that we live and work and play in our society. And education just hasn't kept up. And that's what I hope to continue to work on after I leave this role.
And are you willing to share anything about what that might look like?
If I knew what it was, I would absolutely share it. But I don't know what that is yet. I've got some irons in the fire. It will definitely be in education, not in politics. And as soon as I figure out what it is, I'm going to shout it from the rooftops.
Great. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the long form journalism.